After over a decade of waiting, Diablo 4 is finally launching, and with that, there is tons of stuff to cover. So the goal of this video is to help you learn as much as you can so that you can hit the ground running. And we're going to get this whole thing kicked off with classes. So big question here is, which one is your favorite? Which one do you want to take into launch with you? Getting us started, let's talk about the Barbarian. So as a returning staple to the Diablo franchise, the Barbarian is the prime example of strength, brutality, and weapon mastery. In Diablo 4, the Barbarian has undergone some big changes to help add a little bit of complexity to the class, but if you're a longtime fan of it, you'll still feel right at home. So what makes the Barbarian such a devastating class to consider? Well, first, they deal large amounts of damage with their core skills and additional buffs that support them. They're also the only class that has the Berserking buff, which gives them large increases to damage and movement speed. And speaking of movement, they have multiple skills to help them navigate the battlefield quickly. And lastly, they're pretty tanky after the damage reduction buff they received, so they can take a beating. Now, as with all things, there are trade-offs. So while the Barbarian appears to be an absolute force, they also have a few weaknesses to understand. So one, they're incredibly resource dependent. Fury is what they use, and it is consumed very, very, very quickly. They also have long cooldowns, which can put a pause on your damage output during fights. In short, they're somewhat bursty, so you have to make sure to manage these well. They also have a lack of ranged options, so you're going to spend a lot of time in close range, which can put you in harm's way, which some players simply don't like. And then they are slower early game than other classes, but honestly, it's nothing to worry about because in Endgame, they're projected to be one of the stronger classes. So next, outside of Barbarian, we also have the Druid. The Druid is a savage shapeshifter, fluidly transforming between forms of a powerful bear or a vicious werewolf, all while commanding the power of earth, wind, and storm, unleashing nature's wrath to a devastating effect. Now, they do have a well-rounded set of melee and ranged skills that specialize in dealing physical, lightning, and poison damage. All of these are fueled by spirit, which is generated from basic skills. Now, when it comes to strengths, the Druid definitely has a few. So, one, they do have some decent burst damage, especially when you're spamming skills like Landslide against stunned enemies. But unfortunately, this isn't always sustainable due to the high spirit cost. They also have a strong defensive capability by becoming unstoppable, healing large amounts of health, and building up Fortify to protect against damage. If played correctly, the Druid can take a beating. And then lastly, we have damage versatility. So the Druid is one of those classes that has lots of different ways to hurt you. You can summon companions like wolves and vines, you can shapeshift into a bear or a werewolf, or you can cast nature magic. So if you're someone who likes to change things up, the Druid is definitely a decent pick. So let's talk about weaknesses. One, this Druid is incredibly setup dependent, so much more dependent on creating situations in which they can flourish to maximize their potential. Without these setups, their damage is wildly inconsistent and just simply it's not reliable. So for instance, you'll have to apply like Immobilize and Stun and large CC to groups of enemies in order to maximize your Landslide damage. This is due to Landslide gaining increased critical chance against immobile and stunned enemies. Then we also have Druids being super immobile. So they have two skills to use for mobility, Shred and Trample, but again, these aren't reliable. Trample has a very long cooldown, and Shred requires a target to leap towards. So that's the Druid. Let's go ahead and flip over to the Sorcerer. So when it comes to unleashing torrents of flame, frost, and lightning against hordes of demons, few do it better than the Sorcerer in Diablo 4. They have ultimate control over elemental magic and use it to tear apart enemies while ensnaring others. But as with every high-powered caster, you will quickly perish if you don't take advantage of the powerful defensive spells at your disposal. So strengths for the Sorcerer. Sorcerers are masters at area of effect damage and vaporizing large groups of enemies with ease. They are truly the screen wipe class. They're also masters of crowd control and locking down enemies, and they have a very, very strong movement kit with things like teleport. They'll be able to get in and out of trouble quickly. But all great magic wielders do have their pitfalls, and the Sorcerer suffers from a few key deficiencies as well. One, they're a mana hog. The Sorcerer is going to use mana to fuel her attacks, and because of this, if you're out of mana, you're going to have a hard time dealing damage and staying alive, and some of these spells will require a lot of mana in order to cast. They're also squishy in close quarters. Now, they do have some of those defensive abilities, but again, they're not meant to sit there and take a pounding in close quarters combat. Instead, you want to make sure to manage those well. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time. And then lastly, because the Sorc is so dependent on crowd control and damage multipliers, they can have a tough time dealing with champions and bosses who are immune to those effects. Next, we have the Necromancer. So the Necromancer is the general of the undead, raising and commanding skeletal militia and hulking golems to overpower any enemy that stands in their way. Now, this range class blends summoning with death magic in order to form a really fun playstyle. As with other classes in Diablo 4, the Necromancer has had a facelift, and it's going to bring some really cool new mechanics to the table. So even if you've been like a Necromancer main since day one, there will be some new things here for you to learn and master. Now, the beta was a roller coaster for Necromancers. They were super overpowered in every aspect during the first beta. Blizzard pulled a 180, made minions unbelievably weak for the second beta, and then they brought them back up. They buffed them up a little bit more towards the end of the second beta. So with that, we really don't know which Necromancer we're going to see day one, but either way, the class was really fun to play. Now, when it comes to strengths, the Necromancer has some great damage options for both single target and AoE with skills like Bone Spear and Corpse Explosion. They have Blood Orbs, which give Necromancers a specific way to restore life and essence, which is their fuel for their attacks. And they have really good survivability through things like Blood Mist, which makes you temporarily immune. Now, in terms of weaknesses, skills can be very corpse dependent. So if you don't have any bodies laying around, you will struggle at times to cast some of your spells. And then the Necromancer does have more management with things like minions, skills, and cooldowns than other classes. So there is some more things to keep an eye on rather than just, kind of click and go. So let's talk about rogues next. This is our last one here. Rogues in Diablo 4 are ultra fast, agile strikers who blend melee and ranged attacks to clear any obstacles in their way. They can even mix in a variety of tricks and traps to tilt the situation in their favor. You can play as a trapper, a rogue who specializes in kiting groups of enemies into traps that'll slow and cause high amounts of damage. Or maybe you're more of like a slugger who wants to stick close to enemies, twisting knives to bleed out your target. Or you can be a marksman who picks off targets from a distance to stay out of harm's way. There's all kinds of different ways to play the rogue, and they're one of the most versatile classes in the game. And in terms of strengths, rogues are built to deal tons and tons of damage through their core skills and their passives. So you want to make sure to use those as often as you can to help make quick work of anything in your way. Rogues also have great movement skills. These allow them to zip around the battlefield, but they do also have things like slow, chill, freeze, and stun that they can lock down enemies with in case all of those are on cooldown. And then lastly, rogues are a jack of all trades. You can be like straightforward attacks, you can lay traps, you can slow down groups of enemies, or you can simply blow everything up with heavy damage. Truly, this is kind of a joystick class. You can pick how you want to play and then just dive in and go for that. But rogues do also have some weaknesses. So for one, they're a little bit squishier than other classes. They're going to need some help by investing into dodge chance to avoid taking large amounts of spike damage. So for this one, you want to make sure you choose dexterity, as it'll grant that extra dodge chance and increase skill damage for you. They also require positioning and setups to be most effective. So if you aren't able to debuff your enemies, or if you aren't able to use certain skills because you're out of range, then your damage is going to drop off of a cliff. So all of these are things to consider when choosing a rogue, but honestly, with that being said, they're still a very, very strong class and something to consider. So those are all of the classes, but every class also has a class specialization. It's a special trait that only applies to them that'll unlock at level 15. So for instance, the Sorcerer has the enchantment system that allows them to take skills and then slot them into enchantment slots. In turn, they get some powerful passive effects. The Barbarian has the Arsenal system, which allows them to equip 4 weapons, a 2-handed bludgeoning weapon, a 2-handed slashing weapon, and 2 one-handers that you can dual wield. And as you use these weapon types, you're going to build expertise for that type of weapon and unlock special buffs. So for instance, if you use a 2-handed axe all the time, then you'll gain increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Necromancers have the Book of the Dead. This allows you to perform some really kind of deep customization of your summons, skeleton warriors, skeleton mages, and the golem. Now each summon does have like one of 3 specializations you can choose from. So for example, skeleton warriors can be skeleton skirmishers, defenders, or reapers. Skirmishers are very high DPS, but they're pretty frail. Defenders are the opposite. They have incredibly large health bars, but they don't deal as much damage. And then Reapers have decent health and they deal large amounts of damage, but they're much, much slower. Or you can choose, you know what? None of that makes sense to me. You can forego summoning minions altogether and then choose to give up that ability and gain a very powerful buff for yourself. Rogues have different specializations to choose from. You have things like combo points, inner sight, and preparation. Combo points will allow your basic skills to generate combo points, and then certain skills will consume these for extra effects. Inner Sight will cause attacking marked enemies to fill up a special gauge, and when that gauge is full, you gain unlimited energy for 4 seconds. And then you have Preparation. For every 100 energy you spend, it's going to reduce your ultimate skill cooldown by 4 seconds. And then using your ultimate skill resets the cooldowns of all your other skills. So rogues are very, again, combo heavy and sort of risk reward heavy. And then druids have access to powerful buffs called spirit boons. These grant things like increased health, increased critical damage, and can cause attacks to lower cooldowns or overpower enemies to deal bonus damage. Now, outside of specializations, each class also has a skill tree. Now, these are divided into clusters, and as you spend points in the tree, the clusters further down the tree will unlock, giving you access to more powerful skills. Each class has basic skills, core skills, and ultimate skills. Basic skills are free to use, they don't deal a ton of damage, they generally kind of regenerate a resource for you and apply debuffs to targets. Core skills are your resource spenders. These are going to deal a lot more damage than basic skills and typically make up the bulk of the damage that you're doing. Then each class has some skills that are specific to it. For instance, the druid has a cluster of companion skills, while the rogue has a cluster of stealth skills. And then towards the bottom of the tree, you have your ultimate skills, which are these powerful game-changing abilities that can turn the tide of battle, but they usually have a pretty long cooldown, so you have to make sure to use them wisely. And then next to ultimate skills are your ultimate passives. These are powerful passive effects that will define a playstyle. Now you can only choose one of the ultimate skills and passives at a time. So one passive and one skill. So make sure to choose wisely. Outside of that, you can always go back and reset to refund those points and select different skills. Now lastly, throughout the tree are passive nodes. These are nodes that'll grant things like increases to certain stats, bonuses, or augment the way skills work. So be sure to check these out. Don't spend all your time just looking at the skill nodes, because some of the passives out there have really cool effects that'll take your build to the next level. So that's everything about classes, skill trees, specializations, and class overviews. The next thing I want to talk about is the actual world. What are we doing, right? Let's explore the world of Diablo 4 and figure out everything that we have available to us. So the world of Diablo is split into 5 zones: the frosty mountains of the Fractured Peaks, the green and lush area of Skazglen, the rugged wasteland known as the Dry Steppes, the arid desert of Kyajistan, and the swampy zone of Hawazar. So getting around the world, each zone has its own waypoints, towns, outposts, and a capital city to engage with. Now, waypoints are the primary way to get around quickly in the world of Sanctuary. These are these like glowing runes on the ground, and they allow you to teleport between 2 zones, no matter the distance, right? So unlocking these is not only a critical step for traveling the world, but it also progresses your renown and challenges within the region, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Then we have world tiers. So if you visit the large statue in the middle of the capital city, you'll be able to change your world tiers. Now these work like a difficulty meter for the world of Diablo. Each player will begin at world tier 1 or 2. Then as you progress through the game, you level up, you become stronger. You'll eventually be able to challenge the capstone dungeon of that world tier. If you're able to successfully clear the dungeon, defeat the boss, you'll unlock the next world tier. And you might be wondering, why does it matter to increase your world tier? Isn't this just increasing the difficulty? Why would I want to do that? Well, each tier will unlock something new. So for instance, world tier 3 will unlock sacred and unique items. It'll also unlock nightmare sigils for endgame content, and a new Helltide activity will appear throughout the world. So working through these tiers is critical for maximizing your potential, but also for seeing all of the content that the game has to offer. Next, let's talk about some of the stuff we're going to see actually out in the world as we're going through each zone, starting with events. So throughout the zone, you're going to see these orange circles on your mini-map. These are events that are happening. They often have an objective for you to complete, and you'll see other players participating in the event as well. These are a really good way to earn experience, gold, and rewards while you're leveling up. So if you see an orange circle, be sure to jump in. It's very quick and easy to do, and the rewards are definitely worth it. Then we have world bosses. So far, we know about 3 world bosses we'll have access to, but we've only fought one in the game, and that's Ashava. Now, these are powerful bosses that appear as an event out in the world for players to challenge. If you manage to beat the boss, you have a really good chance at getting some powerful gear, but if not, well, then better luck next time. Then we have dungeons. Dungeons are instance areas that offer a themed adventure complete with a boss fight at the very end. These are found out in the world by looking for this icon. Now, when you complete a dungeon for the very first time, most dungeons will unlock a legendary power that can be used at the Codex of Power, which we'll cover here in a little bit. These also provide Renown, which is a reputation system that'll unlock rewards as you complete certain tasks within a zone. Dungeons are a great place to earn experience and upgrade your gear. So while they're a pushover while you're leveling, dungeons will take on a new difficulty called Nightmare Dungeons in the endgame. These are special variants of the dungeon that are more difficult, but often offer better rewards. Similar to dungeons are strongholds. So these are points on the map where there is a large concentration of enemies, and these are often tied into a story element that'll ask you to clear that area so that humanity can come back in and reclaim it. Each stronghold does have a minimum monster level, so you might need to level up a little bit before you can successfully clear it. And when you clear out strongholds, you're going to receive a large amount of renown and sometimes even unlock a waypoint, vendor, or new dungeon. So clearing these out is super valuable for a variety of reasons outside of just getting a big chunk of experience. Then we have the mini instance areas called cellars. These are small instances that are tucked away that offer a variety of environments to fight in. Most of them are actual cellars, mines, basements, you name it, typically a small dark room. And these are often a single area with enemies and an elite to kill. Sometimes they have chests to loot, other times it's just empty and full of enemies. Now the last major area is called a field of hatred. These are specific areas found out in the world that allow PvP content. And in these zones, you'll be able to slay other players as well as monsters in an effort to collect shards of hatred. These shards are a special currency that can be spent within the zone at special vendors. Now, shards aren't the only thing you can earn from these zones. You'll also find things called seeds of hatred. Now, seeds of hatred have to be cleansed before you can leave the area with them. To cleanse the seeds, you have to find an altar of extraction, but like most PvP games, when you begin an extraction process, other players will be notified and it creates a scuffle. So once you collect your red dust that you've extracted from your seeds of hatred, you can then spend that currency at a vendor in town on cosmetic rewards. So one of the things you're going to encounter early on in the game out in the world are altars of Lilith. These are statues that can be found throughout the world that give experience, renown, and a permanent attribute bonus when you unlock it for the first time. This is very, very important because these attribute bonuses are applied to all characters on the account. Meaning, once you find one, all future characters will also receive those benefits from the very start. Now, there are decent maps out there on like Maxroll and Icy Veins that'll show a lot of the altar locations, so truly, just follow along with those while you're leveling to knock them out on your first playthrough. Another thing you'll see out in the world are emote statues, so these are going to provide you with a temporary buff if you perform the correct emote. We also have shrines. These have been a staple since the very, very early days of Diablo. These provide powerful but temporary buffs that range from things like increasing gold drops to replacing all of your skills with a single powerful ability. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is Renown, because everything we've covered so far will reward Renown, which is a special progress bar that works sort of like Reputation. So as you cleanse altars of Lilith, you fight world bosses, you clear dungeons, strongholds, etc., you're going to earn Renown. And over time, you're going to reach certain milestones that'll reward gold, additional skill points, extra potion charges, currency capacity increases, paragon points. So earning Renown and unlocking these milestones is absolutely critical for progressing within Diablo 4, and without it, your character will fall behind everyone else. So making sure to get that Renown up is going to be something you want to focus on. So that's everything about the world of Diablo 4. Let's talk about combat within this world. So combat in Diablo 4 definitely feels similar to previous Diablo games, but with a slightly different pacing in my opinion. From what we've been able to experience in beta, it does feel slower than Diablo 3, but slightly faster than Diablo 2. Now I cannot speak for how Endgame feels because I didn't get to play Endgame, but the pacing feels good for now. And no matter the class, you will use skills to deal damage, protect yourself, and alter the battlefield with buffs and debuffs. This is a given. This is something that comes standard to any sort of action RPG. But what I want to talk about are some of the finer details of combat that we might not know, starting with combat text. So when in combat, the color of the text you see on the screen will mean different things. So 1, critical damage will appear as yellow. These are attacks that have been amplified to deal additional damage. Now each attack does have a chance to critically strike, and there are 2 stats that influence this system: critical strike chance and critical strike damage. So you want to adjust your gear and skills to take advantage of this system if you want to. Most builds that focus on critical typically do pretty well. Then we have overpower damage, and that's going to be blue. So overpower attacks are strikes that deal bonus damage based on the sum of your current life plus your fortified life. Now damage over time, passives, and channeled attacks cannot overpower, and some classes are going to take advantage of this, like the Druid. They have lots of ways to overpower enemies. Then if you manage to critically strike and overpower in a single strike, so like just a lot of damage in one single hit, the text will appear as orange. So we also have some key debuffs we need to take note of. One, we have vulnerable. This is going to cause enemies to take increased damage. And then we have staggered. Staggered is a bar that bosses typically have. So as you apply crowd control effects like slow, immobilize, stun, freeze, you're going to slowly fill up that stagger bar. Once that bar is full, the boss will become stunned for 12 seconds and give you a damage phase. The last thing I want to cover in combat are resistances. So in Diablo, going all damage all the time is not a viable strategy for most people. You need to have some defense to offset the incoming damage. Resistances are a good way to do that. You have 4 specific resistances to build up by equipping gear, picking up nodes on the Paragon board, and spending skill points on passives. These will reduce the incoming damage of fire, lightning, poison, and cold by the percentage that you see. 25% cold resistance reduces the incoming damage by 25%. Now the last one is resist all, which will help reduce all non-physical damage that you take. So the next question you might have is, well, what about physical damage? Armor is going to be your go-to for that. That'll help you resist physical damage. So stack that up if you keep dying to physical. Otherwise, figure out where you're weak and bolster that chink in your armor. One of the biggest mistakes I see new players make is skimping on their resistances and their defenses to opt in for more firepower. Do not make that mistake. Make a balanced character. All right, so we're going to change gears a little bit and talk about vendors, buying, selling, interacting with all of the systems that are going to help improve your character. So we're going to kick things off with general stores. These are as they sound. They're a store that sells some general items. Their stock isn't usually something to write home about, but early on this could be used to replace a huge gap in your build. Next, we have the healer. This vendor will heal you and replenish your potion charges, so make sure to visit them before you head out. Next, we have the alchemist. This vendor will let you upgrade potions, which is something you should be doing as often as you can. These will help restore more health and keep up with the rising difficulty of the game. You can also craft elixirs, and guys, do not sleep on elixirs. They're temporary, but they provide some really good buffs and even an experience buff that'll give you a little boost to leveling. Lastly, they can refine materials. If you need to upgrade a potion but don't have the right supplies, they can help swap some extra materials that you have into the materials that you need. Then we have the occultist. This is going to be a vendor you'll visit all of the time. They can extract legendary powers from items and imprint those same legendary powers on other items. And you'll have a codex of power that'll hold all of your unlocked legendary powers from dungeons and broken down legendary items. Then you can take those particular things and imprint them onto other items, so you can take a normal rare wand and make it a legendary wand very, very easily. The jeweler will offer services like crafting gems and adding sockets to your gear, so make sure to maximize all of your items by socketing gems. This is going to be critical for getting the most juice out of your character. The blacksmith will help repair broken gear, salvage unneeded items for crafting materials, and upgrade your gear's item power to increase its stats. This should be another frequent visit while you're leveling to make sure you're as optimized as you can be. Then we have the purveyor of curiosities, aka basically a gambler. This vendor accepts obels, which are a special currency. You can earn these by completing events, and then they can be spent on a random item type. This is a great way to find new legendary powers and build up that codex of power we just talked about. The stable master is your mount vendor and mount customization system all built into one. Now here you'll be able to pick up your first mount and equip any ornaments that you have unlocked. We didn't get to see mounts in beta, but we do have confirmed that once you unlock a mount for the first time, you can use it on future characters. Now the last two systems are wardrobe, which is transmog, and stash, which is used to store excess items. So now that we know about the early game and the leveling process, let's touch on what we know about endgame really quickly. So endgame has 3 main content types and a brand new progression system called Paragon boards. So nightmare dungeons are the first one we want to talk about. Each world tier is also going to unlock new nightmare dungeons. These are special variants of regular dungeons that have the difficulty cranked up, but so are the rewards. Now these special dungeons will have affixes to make life more difficult on players, and they'll give additional objectives for you to complete. And in order to get into a nightmare dungeon, you need a key called a sigil. These can be crafted at the occultist and found out in the world, and not all sigils are created equal. Instead, certain sigils will unlock certain groups of nightmare dungeons, so you'll need to visit the correct dungeon to take on the nightmare version of it. The example of an affix they gave is called Hellgate. These are portals that'll randomly appear and pull in various enemy types into the battle to make life a little bit more difficult on the player. Next, we have Whispers of the Dead. This is going to serve the players some bounties that they need to go complete. As you complete these, you're going to collect rewards and return the items to the tree. Upon turning them in, you'll be presented with a few mystery prizes to choose from. Here we can see one-handed weapons, boots, and gauntlets to pick from. These are those coffers that like toss out a few pieces of loot once you open them from your inventory. Next, we have Hell Tides. These are areas of the world that have been corrupted by hell and have attracted more powerful enemies along with environmental threats. So for instance, they mentioned a Helltide area with powerful demons to fight while being bombarded by meteors that you have to avoid. And as you slay these supercharged enemies, they're going to drop a currency that can be used to open special chests that are littered throughout the Helltide region. And lastly, we have that new progression system called Paragon Boards. So Paragon Boards, as you reach the level cap, you're going to gain access to the Paragon system, which gives players a plethora of small nodes that grant minor stat bonuses, but there are also larger nodes that give new passive effects or large stat bonuses. As you near the edge of a Paragon board, you'll be able to choose the next board that you want to snap on, and you can even rotate these to make sure that you are starting at the best possible spot to reach the node that you're after. So from what we know so far, each level will net you 4 Paragon points, and then you'll have a grand total of 200 points to use before you are maxed out. Now, unlike Diablo 3, the Diablo 4 Paragon points are capped. Okay, so there's different tiles on the boards you're going to see as we go through this. So one, you have normal tiles. These are basic white tiles that provide small bonuses. These are like +5, +7 to a stat. Magic tiles are similar to normal ones, but provide slightly larger bonuses to the player. Rare tiles provide large boost to power and often provide additional benefits once the player reaches a certain attribute threshold. So something like, reach 250 dexterity to unlock this extra 10% damage increase, that type of thing. Then we have legendary tiles. These are found at the center of the board, and they provide a new legendary power to unlock and use. But tiles aren't the only thing on the Paragon board that'll provide some big boost to power. You'll also have glyph sockets. So glyphs are dropped items that you can then socket into your Paragon board that'll provide bonuses to any tiles within their radius. And the thing is, glyphs aren't static. You can level them up to extend their reach to affect more tiles. And lastly, you might be wondering if we will see the same boards over and over. Blizzard has confirmed they'll be adding new Paragon boards over time to help keep things fresh and provide new ways for players to spend Paragon points. So everyone, that is the ultimate launch guide for Diablo 4. This is everything that's out there so far that's going to help you on your journey. And honestly, this game has tons and tons of systems in it, especially if you've been somebody who's played Diablo in the past. There's going to be a lot of new stuff to kind of pick up and go with. If you've never played a Diablo game, you're going to come into a world full of tons of content for you to learn and master. I hope this video was helpful for you guys. It was fun to put together, fun to go and learn, and I want to hear from you. In the comment section below, is this the type of content that you guys like to consume? Do you think this is helpful? And what class and build are you going to be starting the game with? Thank you all so much for watching. This has been Vulkan, and I'll talk to you guys next time.